Pwalpar here. I thought I'd share a little story with you today. It's a railroad story and a fishing story combined. We'll call it the Runaway Rail Car and a Fishing Tale. Today I share this story with my viewers. It's a story that I've told before, but I've re-edited it today and I'm retelling it. And I've added more details. I was watching videos on YouTube the other day. A channel I'm subscribed to put up a video about a runaway tank car that had rolled away from someplace up in Ohio and was eventually derailed in order to stop it. It brings to my mind a time in a similar story. My line of work at what was then called Southern Railway, where I was a railway carman and responsible for inspecting and repairing rail cars. When repairing rail cars, unexpected things would often happen that could often be quite dangerous and hazardous to one's health. I could and probably should write an entire story about such times. Things don't always go according to Hoyle. You can be careful as a devil and still stuff happens. That day would prove to be one of those unexpected times. I recall the time we were based in Atlanta, Georgia. I was dispatched to go on a road trip on the line of road somewhere up on the Piedmont Division. I do not recall what city it was near. It was in a rural area, I remember that. I drove up to a road crossing near a switch where a long siding paralleled the road, and it was just beyond the switch sat a long tri-level auto carrier type rail car that was sitting there waiting for repairs or some kind of attention. We had to often figure out why they didn't tell us what it was set out for. It's not uncommon for trains to stop and leave defective rail cars along the main line somewhere. I was accompanied that day by Mr. Eddie Murphy. Eddie was an easy-going, quiet, and soft-spoken black man who I often worked with, both in the repair shops and on road trips, and in fact he worked with us on the derrick crew when we went on train wrecks. I mention Eddie in particular because my story brings him to mind and because he's no longer with us. Rest in peace, Eddie. It was parked a little bit too far from where we could get to it with the truck. I don't remember exactly what was wrong with the car, but it also had a defect in particular that we never suspected. We needed to get the car moved up closer to the crossing where we could reach it with our big repair truck. In order to move the car, it was necessary to bleed the air off the car's reservoir and release the air brakes. Then we needed to release the handbrake in order to let the car roll down to where we needed it to be, and then put the handbrake back on. Neither of us noticed the car had a defect and that it was what they call pulling dead. In other words, when completely wound up, it still wasn't applying enough pressure to keep the car from moving to make the brakes work. Yeah, stuff happens when you least expect it. Eddie goes to the other end of the car. Those cars were 90 feet long. He knocks off the handbrake. In the meantime, I'm near the wheels on the far end of the car, holding a wooden wedge. I had already bled the air out of the reservoir. So I'm just going to chock the wheel to stop the car where I want it to stop. I'm near the wheels on the far end of the car, holding a wooden wedge to chock and stop the car if it needs stopping. Anyway, it commenced to roll. Now, it should be noted that most rail cars have a wheel that you turn to apply handbrakes on it, and it can be done quite quickly. But a tri-level has a handbrake on the side of the car. It doesn't have a brake wheel. Instead, it has a handle you lift up and down. You have to lift it up and down, and it ratchets the brakes back on. It takes considerable time to apply that handbrake. Well, I realized the car was starting to move too fast, and it ran right over my chock. When I stuck the block up under the wheel, I yelled, "Wind that handbrake back up, Eddie, real quick." He winded the handbrake as quick as he could, but like I say, you got a ratchet on that thing. He jumps up on he's winding it back up and taking him a long time. By that time, it was moving pretty good. It ran right over another wooden wedge. It kept going. Eddie was up on the side of the car by then, standing on its seal step, cranking on that handbrake. I could see he was fixing to jump off. As he went by me, I threw another wooden wedge under there, and it ran right over like it was a toy. By then, Eddie was going 10 to 15 miles an hour, and he was going to jump off. I could see that, and I said, "You keep winding on that brake. Don't let go. Don't you quit." He was ratcheting on it for all he was worth, but he couldn't get any more out of it. The brakes were tight enough to make the car squeal, but the track incline was steep enough to make the car keep rolling. I jumped in the truck and raced down the side of the road beside the tracks where it was headed to get ahead of the car. I threw some chains across the track, blocks of wood, anything I could find to throw out there that might stop the car. I threw a big logging chain across the track, and when the car got there, it caught on that chain, made the wheel start sliding, and brought it to a slow stop. The car stopped about 10 feet from the end of the track, where it joins back onto the main line. There was a derail there, but we got it stopped just before the derail. If it had run over the derail, we would have probably lost our job, or at least had a whole lot of explaining to do. I could just see that thing getting wrecked and derailed, and me and Eddie would be looking for a job. That car, by the way, was loaded with brand new Corvette automobiles. Needless to say, we did repair the handbrake by adding new brake shoes and adjusting the brakes. I don't remember what else we did to repair the car. I'm certain that when we released the car to go on its way, the train crew was totally puzzled as to why the car was a mile away from where it originally parked. Many of my stories here on YouTube are railroad related, and there's a link in my video description to my Walter Stories playlist. Today's story brings more memories about Eddie Murphy, so I will share just one more with my viewers. A few years later, I was then based out of Griffin, Georgia, and I stopped by the Yard repair track in Atlanta. Well, it was more than a few years. It was more like 10 years. Anyway, I stopped by the Yard repair track in Atlanta on a Friday afternoon about a year before I retired from the railroad. That was in 2003. I was talking to him, and he asked me a question. "Didn't you have a pontoon boat? Do you still have it?" I said, "Funny you should ask. I've got it all ready to go to the lake Saturday." This was on a Friday afternoon. "I know you live out near Fort Gillum, near Forest Park. Would you like to go with me and wet a few hooks? Them crappies are running strong right now. Griffin ain't that far for you to drive from your place." "Oh yes, I would like that," he said. Well, Saturday afternoon arrived. I had the boat all hooked up to my pickup truck, ready to roll down the driveway when Eddie arrived at my house. I had the poles and tackle blocks loaded and ready to go. He parked his vehicle and hopped in the truck with me. I pulled up on the road and headed east. About halfway to Jackson, Georgia, he looked at me and asked, "Do you have any minnows for us to fish with?" That was late in the afternoon, and I was planning on fishing all night, providing they were biting, of course. "No," I replied, "I ain't got no minnows. But I don't think we'll need any. Besides, there ain't going to be any bait and tackle stores open right now anyway." He looked at me as if to say, "Are you crazy?" But instead he said, "We can't catch crappies with no minnows." "Sure we can," I replied. "We'll use jigs. I got a ton of them in various colors. Believe me, Eddie, we'll catch some crappies tonight. You'll see." Well, by dark, we were anchored in a good spot on Lake Jackson. I had my lanterns lit and hanging off the side of the boat, one off the aft and one forward. I tied on a small white jig and said, "Rig your pole like this and drop it down about 15 feet. He looked very disappointed, but I know he figured he ain't going to catch no fish. But he did as I suggested. He sat at the rear of the boat, and I sat near the bow. He watched as I gently jigged my pole slightly to tease the fish into striking my jig. Within a minute I had one on and was hauling at a big old slab black crappie. He was in awe to realize we didn't need no minnows at all. We fished until almost daylight. We must have had 50 good keepers in the boat. I knew he was wondering how we would divide the fish when we arrived back at my place in the wee hours of the morning. I had them all on ice in the fish keeper. I handed him a 5-gallon bucket and said, "Put all them fish in this bucket, and some of that ice too, and carry them home with you." "But what?" he asked. "Ain't you going to keep some?" "No," I replied. "I got some in the freezer already. Them fish belong to you now." I had a fairly nice garden that year, and I said, "Before you go, Eddie, go out there to the garden and pick you a mess of cucumbers and squash." And I gave him another 5-gallon bucket. When I learned of Eddie's passing a few years later, I was glad I had took the time to ask him to go fishing with me on that last fishing trip. Anyway, thanks for listening to my story today. This is Walter, wishing all my viewers well. Y'all have a good day.